Folks, let's remember that we are in the holy presence of God. St. John Baptiste de La Salle, pray for us. Live Jesus in our hearts forever. Owing to the fact that I agreed to be part of the Lasallian International Collegiate Case Conference happening on April 10th, I agreed to this a month or two ago before I knew exactly what that would mean. I agreed to it, so I'm absent. One of the big themes that I wish I had time to cover with you in this class would be presence and absence, especially how that works out in people like Husserl and phenomenology in general. But we don't, alas, I'm absent, but I'm present to you virtually. I'm asking you to look at this during class time. It's not going to be belabored, it's going to be very quick. So strap in, boys, here we go. One of the overriding questions of the history sequence that we do here at St. Mary's I think elegantly is summed up by Fred's insistence on the fragility of consciousness. The subtitle, Faith, Reason, and the Human Good. The editors remind us that if there's anything that Fred is trying to argue is that conversation is the central praxis, especially for us who are Catholic. And this is my and our insistence on the use of sources and authorities. In the way that we speak, in the way that we do discourse as Catholics especially, it depends on us citing sources and being at least comfortable enough with something like a historical critical method that makes us a decent dialogue partner or a conversation partner in the postmodern era. So, one last virtual reiteration or reflection on the conversation that the history sequence has been meant to constitute for you. The stakes of the conversation are anthropological. That's because we live after Benedict XVI and Karl Wojtyla, the phenomenologist. We owe a lot to those particular characters. So when we are in the ancient horizon, we're thinking always about the conversation between the mythological predecessors. Usually we signify that with Homer and Hesiod. They have a poetic approach, a mythological approach to telling the story of origins. And so they're aiming at our emotion centers. They're aiming at our hopes and our fears about the human-divine relationship. And in that, we can very simply say that the relationship looks rather like a puppet master. You appease the god and you get the toys. You make the god pissed off and you get your whole island buried by a mountain. Enough said about the pure fideist puppet master approach. Let's say that we're now relying on Bruno Schnell because he has a text called The Discovery of the Human Mind. So I'm practicing what I preached. I'm not coming at this from nowhere. I'm coming at this through a sourced authority. His name's Bruno Schnell. The Discovery of the Human Mind. He suggests that is the transition from what we would loosely call the mythological framework to the logical framework, otherwise known as the pre-Socratics, usually signified by Thales, who makes the first all statement. All is, and he happens to say water, but it's the logical format that really matters there. In this case, then, the anthropology is that the human is not a plaything of the gods. There is such a thing as nature now, phusis. That's a word that I should probably have put up there. And we can somehow, if not master it, we can master our own logical approach to it. So instead of worshiping the moon or the sun for their theological significance to our cult, instead we can say like Aristotle or better, we can say like Heraclitus, that the sun is the size of a human foot. And this is a blasphemy because you're daring to talk about something that's in the mythological, pathological, theological horizon. That would be heresy because it's a god. It's not measurable. But now we're becoming masters of nature, let's say. Not all the way to Descartes yet, but something like that. It won't hurt us to see now the human has a certain kind of efficacy that it wouldn't have in a purely mythological or pathetic framework. So thanks Bruno Schnell, thanks ancient philosophy. We're now moving to the account of Socrates and his practice. it will give us then the third of our Holy Grail. We have a pathetic approach in the mythological, we have a logical approach in the pre-Socratic, and now we have an ethological, an ethological approach in Socrates. It's again, it's Socrates' praxis, his practice, that matters more than any words that he says. And in that anthropology, then, the human is a question. It's not a puppet of the gods. It's not a master of nature. It's a question to be solved. Socrates is done with cover stories from religion and cover stories from science. Let's be honest, we don't know what it even means to be good as a human. So let's work that out together in conversation. It gets him killed. There are certain stakes to that conversation that are exacted by the church and the state of its day. So, very good. The human is a question. On the Socratic anticipation, Plato brings us our first instance of true and proper idealism. It emphasizes the intelligent portion of the human and thus posits a dualist, where we have the mind or the soul is good and the stuff is bad, the body. Again, we could fill that out with direct primary text. I'm especially fond of how the Phaedo does it at certain points. The Republic does it in interesting ways. Even the Phaedrus has direct anthropological musings from Plato. Let's just, for ease of reference, call this the idealist, dualist approach. Aristotle, in the conversation, enters the chat with his hand out, not his hand up, like the Raphaelite image. Instead, he is offering now a hylomorphic approach where we have both are good. What's good? The mind is good. What's also good? The body and experience. So where Plato is elevating intelligence and human formality being good, instead Aristotle's daring to bring experience, the horizon, into it. If we want, Plato is all vertical, Aristotle is horizontal, and it's going to be a longer walk to verify the empiricism that he wants. But he's arguing for a hylomorphic account of the human. Interesting to note that the medieval commentators, the Maimonides, Averroes, Avicenna, and Aquinas, are all going to differ slightly on the anthropology. This is a too quick flyby, but that is a very fun conversation to have. We're moving to the medieval, and I always prefer Jan Ertsen's account because it's so fun and playful. Is there a medieval philosophy is the name of one of his barn burner articles that 8 people in the world have read. But it asks a nice question, because isn't it the case that this medieval synthesis, the so-called medieval synthesis, is really just a reflection by Augustine back on Plato, so that we have the dubito ergo sum, we have idealism creeping back in, we have the invention of the voluntas or the will, so there's an interiority to the human that is undubitable. And so Augustine, Plotinus give us this new inwardness that's now even dangerously wrapped up with egology, is a term we could throw into the mix. Worth looking up and recording. Just find out what that is. Egology. An ecology of egology might be what Augustine foists upon us through the dubito ergo sum and other tricks. Aquinas then would be the Aristotle 2.0, again offering a hylomorphic account. That will put him especially at odds with Averroes, who does tend to a idealist solution in some ways about Aristotle. Okay, we're doing good. Modern. We're going to just today let that be Descartes. A source and authority, I would go with Pope Francis's Laudato Si. The opening salvo is directly aimed at Descartes' project of mastery and possession of nature by the humans through method which ostensibly eliminates bias and gives our rational subjectivity, our cogito ergo sum, direct access to the beloved objective truth, where we have Catholic answers residing nicely. Great. That's a rationalist anthropology. It absolutely assumes that there is such a thing as a method that will eliminate bias and that will deliver objective truth. The burden is on you to produce that method and show us rational agents working out objective truths in any of the relative sciences. This becomes the modern anticipation. I'll cite Robert Faulkner. He says that Bacon and Descartes are involved, mainly Bacon, are involved in what he calls a project of progress. So I like those words. Faulkner chooses them carefully. Project of progress. Progress away from bias, to method, away from your subjective opinion and my deliverance of the objective truth from a rational framework that is methodologically supported. And that is going to give us progress over all these dumbass medieval and ancient philosophers. So it's the regnant rationalism of our time that is born there in the hands of Bacon, Descartes, Galileo, etc. And it yields our obsession with objective truth. So this semester we've enacted a three-part harmony. One, we undertook seminar. We distinguished Kierkegaard and Nietzsche around a very simple blade of pathological mythography. They've gone back to, if they see Descartes, Hegel, and Bacon involved in a project of progress, these guys smell the Jews, gypsies, and queers burning in the fires of Auschwitz already. And so they raise up, I always think it's a bit of a prophetic posture. There are some texts, serious academic texts, that explore Nietzsche and Kierkegaard as prophetic. And there is something to back that up, even from our slim evidence from this semester. To Descartes' proposed rationality, they openly take an irrational tack. They take one of your dearest things associated with the faith horizon, namely its origin, Abraham, who should be one, and complicate it and turn it into four Abrahams. That's Kierkegaard's move. We should also notice he's got his own conversation going on with Saul Paul, because he has the title drawn from him, Fear and Trembling. Instead of rational, objective, Catholic answers, Kierkegaard is giving us pathetic, mythographically written, difficult questions about our origin figure, the father of faith. And so he's playing on our fear and on our trembling. Nietzsche doing the same, harshly criticizing Christ and Christendom, which we reviewed last class, and the twin towers of positivism and nihilism. Instead, he's calling us to perhaps reenact and reappreciate who is Yeshua. So yeah, the title of the book looks frightening. It's Antichrist. This guy must be a Satanist. No, he's actually asking us the question about who was that original practitioner back there, namely Yeshua, the evangel. So he's doing philology, Nietzsche is. He's digging on that word. What does it mean to be the good news? Okay, great. So that's got a very interesting possibility. Maybe the human does have an irrational component. Again, reflex always goes the other direction. Husserl Brentano, in a lighter way than Gottlob Frege, head toward a logos moment again. So we've got the reinvention of the tension that started us down the path of philosophy to begin with. A pathetic, mythographical, prophetic approach, and then we get a logical reflex. Looking for us as human, especially in Frege, if you don't know that word metasis, you should have it now. I'm not rehearsing this for my health. I better see all these words that you don't know defined in the back of your black and red. Okay, and so that gives us, in a sense, Plato 4.0. Gives birth to what we were calling the analytical tradition. We also had the continental. And that opens the horizon for our conversation. Each of you has a figure from either the continent or the analytical tradition, the so-called divide in postmodern philosophy. And so we arrive at the moment that this Fred's thesis can be made good for us. What Fred says is conversation. His editors remind us that Fred is arguing that conversation is the praxis. The theme of conversation is the repeated point of the 12 essays in Fred's volume. And it is for me to remind you his sources, because he is an authority for me, and that makes him an authority for you. One, it's Gadamer, who's talking about the conversation that we are. So that's a really nice answer to the anthropology. Fred is obsessed, I guess we would say. He's daring to title this The Fragility of Consciousness. That signals an interest not only in what we were defining yesterday as psychology, but also postmodern philosophy. He's using Gadamer as a source. The next one is a figure named Vogelin, Vogelin, and his contribution is Vogelin's method of meditative exegesis likewise carries a clear dialogical structure, as the search for understanding the order of being leads to the discovery of one's, quote, specific humanity as that of a questioner. So we have two more answers on what is the human. Gadamer says we are a conversation. Vogelin insists on us as a questioner who interrogates various symbolizations and distortions that span human history. That's the conversation that we've been trying to invite you to. However poorly or however excellently we've done that is up to to your practice going forward. The last source for Fred and for you and for me is Lonergan. Lonergan, too, accentuates the crucial priority of questioning in the operations of human knowing. Through questioning, we not only understand and judge in matters of fact, but we also inquire into values and meanings of the human good, asking, who shall I become? What is the right way to live? That's important. That's a reenactment of the Socratic turn. That's how Fred and others taught it in Boston. The Socratic turn is intimate to the Christian conversation. Let me wax on the last bit from the text here. Furthermore, Lonergan's conception of theology as collaborative and interdisciplinary enterprise that mediates between the Christian tradition and its cultural context has an unmistakably conversational cast, coordinating the various tasks of theological inquiry into an ongoing engagement with historical, here comes your Newman word, development. So it was very fitting to get that lecture from Holly Ordway this week on Newman. His big influence on Tolkien was to understand that dogma has development incipient in it. And so Fred has brought us into this awareness that this has all been an attempt to start a conversation for you, not to provide objective truths or answers. Our business is to bring you into working through sources and authorities, honoring your experience and reflection on it that can yield understandings. Those understandings will fuel your judgments and your choices. But you don't do this cognitional activity as a cogito ergo sum alone in an interiority that's purely rational and governed totally by method. In fact, the opposite is the case. You've been talked into talking by talkers who were talked into talking by talkers who themselves were talked into talking by talkers. The only time Tades dared to touch the Trinitarian reality in this semester was to point out that there is something important about knowing that God is a conversation, because God has three persons. And that is what this, if we have an imago Dei, Fred and Lonergan and many Thomists point out that we've got this amazing erotic orientation. It comes to us through suffering. Not only do we suffer experience, we didn't ask for it, we didn't choose to be an experiencer. We are an experiencer. In that experience, we also suffer in a second way, the advent of question. You don't choose to have a question. Questions come upon us as a suffering. And in the intelligent, who suffer a lot, they come frequently. And in the ignorant, they come rarely. For Lonergan, this is not, we are not going to be doing Plato 1, 2, 3, 4.0. It's not a question about the rational capacity of any given individual. It's about the consciousness. And so that means that all of us are capable of reflecting on the experience of having questions and then of suffering answers. It's also true that we suffer the question, we suffer the answer. We don't get to choose that we have an answer. Catholic answers can provide shit that you memorize, objective truths for true-false tests. Great. That doesn't get you into the experience, understanding, and judgment, the cognitional acts. So, Lamartin's argument is that you suffer questions based on having suffered experience. In the reflective person, you'll recognize that you've suffered answers as much as you've suffered questions. You get an aha moment, but you didn't choose the aha moment. Now, that's great. You got an answer. I keep referring to the experience of me understanding Toodaloo from my mom saying it out loud in the middle of Rome, Illinois, to having an answer. That must mean tout à l'heure in French. And then I went to my French teacher, and she shit on my parade because I had the quidsit. What is it? What is it? What is it? I got it. Tout à l'heure is Toodaloo. She is more familiar with the critical function, the second erotic movement, which we are involved with, ansit. There is a choice there. Is it really the answer? So even if we imagined ourselves getting these dearly beloved, rationally available, objective answers, we still would have to submit them to the community and to our own further reflection. Is it really that? And I know you know what my French teacher said. Maybe. We'd have to do more research to find out. Answers aren't as available as we wish they were on the podcast that we love. Okay. Aquinas makes this beautiful recognition. You don't have an infinite amount of time to reflect, deliberate, and choose. You're going to have to make a judgment at some point. And you're never going to have completely sufficient evidence to say that this is the objective good or this is the objective truth. What's objectively true is that we are oriented to the good. But what does that mean on any given Tuesday afternoon is very hard for any one of us to individually observe. So we make a judgment, we make a choice, and we move out. So that closes the circle for the 10th of April for this little mini lecture that's trying to wrap it up and to preview what's coming. Each of you has had some experience, some understanding, some judgment, and made some choices in relation to the figure from the continent or from the analytical tradition that you were working on for this class. What's coming up next week is a 10-minute sharing from you and a 5-minute asking and answering. And I think you should legitimately aim for like 9 minutes because we want to be able to shut that thing off and the next person will jump up and start to load their Prezi while that person does the answering of the questions. So that's my argument about conversation. I think that's my interpretation of why the church in her wisdom makes you study a history sequence at the undergraduate level in the area of philosophy. Again, I'll just put the very finest point. It's not so that you have access to the objective truths that you're going to be puking out at your poor future parishioners, spewing Catholic answers to fill their vacant selves. Instead, you're going to be entering into conversation with them in the very way that you entered into conversation with the figures from the postmodern horizon. Why Fred indicated this as Christian conversation and not Catholic conversation was demonstrated beautifully in class. One of you said, conversation, yeah, that's with Augustine and Aquinas. You didn't say it exactly like that, but no, that's not conversation. That's masturbation. That's autism. What we've got to do instead is engage, as Vincent St. Maria's, someone as crazy as Kristeva, who dares to read Freud seriously and be an atheist. Matteo is relating, at least partially, to Simone de Beauvoir, and then to a postmodern philosopher who's wondering about what is cybersex. That is conversational because that is not inside of the Catholic tent with all the answers that we've huddled around as objectively true, and the best puppet is the who gets all the points. Thank you all. Thanks for putting up with this approach for this semester. I'm looking forward to your black and reds on Monday. I'll be collecting them then. Thank you all. I appreciate all the work we've done.